I'm going to start out, I'm sure everyone knows what a daylily is. There are thousands upon thousands of varieties of daylilies out there. But there are very few that are so extraordinary like this yellow landscape supreme. There are evergreen daylilies that are outstanding for down here. They're the dormant varieties that literally go dormant, go to sleep through the winter. Those are the varieties that grow up north, because if they tried to be evergreen, the freezes up there would kill them. But there's a problem with most daylilies. Years ago, there's something called daylily rust, and it can really do a lot of damage to daylilies. And we had to discontinue growing some absolutely gorgeous varieties because they were so susceptible to this rust. And finally, I decided I'm just going to stick with one outstanding daylily we have grown for 30 years, and it's the Yellow Landscape Supreme. It's evergreen, it's tough, beautiful clumping plant, full sun or light shade, and the flowers, it's a repeat bloomer. They are large, beautiful yellow, but there's a wonderful substance to the petals. They're not sort of a weak, tissue papery type petal. So here's a stand at our landscape at Tree Search Farms. Because what we do is have beds of these, and then we'll divide a bed to pot up for purchasing. But repeat bloom, this thing blooms and repeat blooms over and over. After a heavy bloom cycle, you can go out and cut the old stalks off, and it'll just say, okay, I'm ready to take off again. If you divide your daylilies, you do it the opposite season that they bloom. So they bloom now. You divide daylilies and Louisiana iris and certain other plants in the fall. So when you have a nice clump that's, let's say, 3 years old, in the fall, dig it up, gently divide it. You can replant your garden, or you can gift the divisions, some of them. But it's a plant that keeps on giving, and unbelievable. If you're wanting to specialize in plants for butterflies and hummingbirds and bees and birds, a lot of those perennials go dormant. So you have to think, what's going to be green in the winter? And I use a lot of bulbs. A lot of bulbs that go dormant in the summer, but they grow through the winter and come up. So anyway, that Yellow Landscape Supreme, plant it maybe in front of this Mexican butterfly weed. And this can get up to 3 feet tall. Now, you want monarchs? You have to plant this plant, because the Asclepias family, the milkweed family, is the host plant for the monarch butterfly caterpillar. It's the only genus of plant that butterfly needs to feed its caterpillar. And this is a beautiful plant. It blooms in heavy cycles. It can get 3 feet tall. And I'm going to give, on average, 3 feet tall. They bloom beautifully, but then full sun or light shade. But you're planting them to feed the caterpillars and the nectar for all butterflies and bees. And the challenge is, first off, you never spray. They have a specific aphid that only eats or not dines on Asclepias. But that's okay. If an aphid's on there, my retail nursery, like Joshua's Native Plants or Buchanan's, they get excited, which is so weird. If we had been talking about this 15 years ago, people would be, oh my gosh, it has aphids, kill them. They get excited when they know my plants have aphids, because they know we have not sprayed our plants. And so it won't kill caterpillars that they're they grow, that dine on the plants that they buy from us. Now, here's another thing. Naturally, if you just leave it alone, the ladybugs come. And the ladybugs, it takes a little time for them, but they will take care of the aphids. Okay, green eyes. This is a really tough native perennial. Now, when I talk about sort of rosettes, it's the basal plant down near the base. And this is very tough and very root hardy. So mine are coming up already, out of the ground, and then it puts on these flower stalks up to 3 feet tall and blooms its head off over and over, all up and down the stems, these beautiful yellow flowers with a green center, hence green eyes. And the foliage is sort of a blue-gray green, and it's a velvety texture. Now this also we mulch all our beds with pine needles. I mean, nice, thick, 3+ inches of pine needles. And one main reason, first, they don't wash off in a heavy rain, but second, weed seed do not get down through and make contact with soil. So you control weeds from the seed if you have a thick bed of pine needles. We bark mulch, weed seed sprout in the nooks and crannies of the bark mulch, and the next thing you know, you still have weeds. But this seed can also seed out. You'll have seedlings come up in the garden. I don't have as many because I have thick beds of pine needles, but I also like it seeding out. And that's full sun, and it blooms after a heavy bloom cycle. When it's fewer flowers, you can go and cut those stalks back, and normally it'll put up some fresh ones and continue blooming, and then eventually it'll go dormant, totally dormant in the winter, and then start coming back up. It's a shame I could not find my picture of my David Verity, the shrub look. David Verity Kufia, the cigar plant, this is the ultimate in cigar plants. They, first off, the Kufias almost never stop blooming. And this plant shows how thick and dense. It averages 3 feet tall. Now, if you never prune it, it could get taller. The hard thing about pruning David Verity or almost any Kufia, it never quits blooming. People don't want to cut something that's full of blooms. But if for any reason you either want to control height or it needs to be a little fuller, which is what I do when they're young plants, just cut it. It'll be blooming again before you know it. But you have about 1 inch orange and yellow flowers, non-stop. Spring, summer, and fall. And what really is extraordinary, quite a few years ago, we had about 50 beautiful 3-gallon plants, and we were showing a customer, just walking around the plants. There were 2 hummingbirds about 2 feet away from us, totally ignoring us, going after the flowers. This prefers full sun, and it comes back year after year. This last year's freeze, I lost some in the garden that had been there many years. I have 2 that are beginning to show some new growth. New gold lantana, there are many kinds of lantanas. If you think about the lantanas, the pentas, the verbenas, all have a cluster of little flowers. Because people look and say, that's a flower, the whole thing. But one of those is made up of many, many little tiny flowers. And that's what the bees and the butterflies and the hummingbirds are going after. This is an extraordinary, tough lantana that's been around a long time, but what's nice about it, it's a nice mounding, low, maybe 2 feet tall by 3 feet, where we have a native one that'll get 4 feet and just take over the world. And I don't like that one in the garden, personally. But this one, you can see the low mounding, if it's in a raised bed where it can cascade over, or even in containers where it can sort of cascade over. But you can see how this also can be combined with the butterfly weed. Now this does sort of go deciduous, dropping its leaves in the winter and slightly dormant. You can see they're just stunning. Now the lantanas will have heavy, heavy bloom cycles, and then they begin to look they're sort of finishing off that cycle. Go in either with clippers or with hedge shears. Just give it a little shearing. I'm almost feel naked without my clippers on me. But then it flushes right back out, even thicker, and right back into bloom. And lantanas will bloom from spring. If it's a mild winter, it'll keep blooming into winter. Sun. These all are sun-loving. They can take a little shade. They just don't bloom as well if it's too shady. Okay, Coreopsis. Coreopsis is another wonderful native perennial. There are many, many varieties on the market now, but a lot of them are these fancy hybrids that may be pretty. A lot of them have not held. We've trialed a lot. A lot of them have not held up through our summer heat and humidity, which is the biggest problem we have for plants. And this one is Early Sunrise is a selection for this wonderful yellow, double yellow flower. And it almost looks like a bouquet of flowers. It's a nice clumping form, maybe 18 inches tall in bloom, repeat blooming. Again, after a heavy bloom cycle, you can just shear off the stalks or go down maybe halfway and cut it off, and it'll come right back. And these are another great root hardy perennial. Beautiful flowers. Okay, Gulfstrom rudbeckia, black-eyed Susans. There are all kinds of black-eyed Susans, many native varieties, some that get 7 feet tall, and then some that have been hybridized. I'll mention this with the pentas, but a lot of the fancy hybrids that have come out on a lot of these don't have the amount of nectar that the older varieties or natives or heirlooms normally have. Now, Rudbeckia Gulfstrom is very tough, slowly clumps out. It blooms in the summer, so mine in the ground is about a 4-year-old plant, and it went from 1, well, I planted 3, and they've just filled out to where they've made this beautiful clump. So when they bloom in the summer, they bloom for a couple of months. It's not something that blooms nonstop. But when it blooms, it is spectacular. And the stalks, 18, 20 inches, great cut flower. That one definitely looks like a bouquet. And then you can have salvias around it. It looks like a shrimp plant in the background. Prefers full sun, but this is a superb, long-lived perennial. Okay, variegated red shrimp plant. Shrimp plants are very old-fashioned. I don't know if our grandparents had them. Tough. I have not lost a shrimp plant, even from that freeze last year. They freeze back normally, and you have to chop it all back. Normally February I'll cut things back, and then they flush back out. They will, this one is also, they'll sort of shrub out easily up to 4 feet by 4 feet if you allow it. But once it starts blooming, it just blooms, and it has a mottled type of variegation on it, but it's an extraordinary bloomer. And if back in when you were kids, ever pulled a flower out and sucked the sort of the nectar out of the back of it, it's fun. Yeah, the red is the calyx, and the actual flower are the white flowers coming out of it. And that's what the hummingbirds and the butterflies and the bees go for. But if you pull one of those out when we were kids and you suck the back of it, you're getting the honey or the nectar that they're getting. We're just getting it from the reverse end. Honeysuckle, yeah, Doesn't grow fast because it's always blooming. That's one of the things. But yes, you can, full sun or part shade. Oh my gosh, there's so many different kinds of salvias. This salvia indigo spires is a blooming fool. And it can, in bloom, get up to 4 feet tall. But again, you can, after a heavy bloom, just cut it in half. It comes right back thicker, but it has these long, wonderful stems of blue flowers over and over and over. And again, prefers the full sun or light shade. Too much shade is going to get leggy. But if nothing else, I'm going to drill into you, cut things back. It's not going to hurt them. That easily, after those spikes are just beginning to age, you could just go in with head shears and cut it in half. And water it well. If you want to give it a little extra fertilizer, and it's going to flush back. Every time you cut, it's going to force something to branch. Makes it thicker and fuller. Oh my gosh. Now, they have these hybridizers keep working on creating new and different plants, and they patent them. Well, a lot of these patented plants don't work at all down here. They don't think about the Gulf Coast and the heat and humidity in our summers. This crazy thing is unbelievable. Of course, I say that about a lot of plants. But the skyscraper orange, and I saw in the handout it says it's sort of coral. It's more orange, but in the landscape, mine got to be about 2.5 feet tall, very thick. Now, I always like to plant maybe 3s or 5s, but because it does get, I think I placed them 2 feet apart in a triangle. So they made this, when they grew together, they made this spectacular stand. What impressed me about this one was the denseness and the sturdiness of the stems staying tight, and blooms just beautiful. And again, after a heavy bloom cycle, or if it looks like it needs a pruning, cut it back, or cut it in half, or cut it in a third, and let it flush back out. But again, you can do a lot of these in containers, give it enough size, or in the garden. Now, May night salvia, there are many, many salvias I would like to have talked about, but I'm not going to talk about something I don't have available. That's not fair to you guys. I've sat in talks and got excited about something, and then the speaker says, oh no, you can't get that. It's like, then why'd you talk about it? Okay, this is a unique salvia because the plant itself is very low mounding. Full sun or light shade. It actually likes a little light shade in our summers. And it clumps out. And when it blooms, now these shots are shots up like Chicago. We had to get that off the internet years ago. Shouldn't have said that. We had permission. It's hard to always get pictures, the timing when things are blooming. But where the colder climates, the flower spikes are longer. So here, our flower spikes, maybe not quite as long, but it is a beautiful salvia. Has been in our garden for a long time, but it's low mounding. Instead of, like indigo spires is great in the background, and then having the skyscraper in front of that, or yellow, or those mixes. But when this is in bloom, oh my gosh, it's spectacular. Okay, Gara. Gara is a native perennial that's out. The normal Gara is white flowers, and it's out in our prairies. I mean, it grows from here to Galveston. It grows all over the place. But it's in the prairies. So you think about, when we have a drought, this thing still survives. Sometimes it'll tolerate floods. Well, this is a pink version, which is beautiful. Now the Gara's very airy. It's a clump-forming perennial. But as it ages, and if you prune it early on to get it fuller, now once it's established, it just let it go. But very airy, long, slender stems, just covered with these pink flowers up and down the stems. Almost looks like pink butterflies hovering over it. But, I don't have a picture. Again, this is native, it's tough, and it's butterflies and bees love it. Now, rock rose pavonia, another fabulous native perennial, a little more of a woody stemmed perennial. It is deciduous. Normally, it sort of freezes back, and you have this woody stemmed leftover, and then late February, I'll cut that back and let it all flush back out. Now, the regular pavonia is that pink color. You can see how bushy it can get. Easily can get 3 feet by 3 feet if you let it, or if you want it to. Now, there's one in shade. It's not blooming as much. It prefers full sun or a little shade in the summer. Now, this is our standard native pink, and of course, okay, Gulf Coast penstemon, another extraordinary native. Penstemons are evergreen. So you go to New Mexico, you'll see penstemons that'll knock your socks off. You try to plant them here, the first rain or the heat, they're dead. But this Gulf Coast penstemon is an evergreen mound. It looks like a mound of spinach all winter long. This wonderful green mound. And then in the spring, it puts up these stalks, can get up to 3 feet tall, just covered with these tubular lavender flowers. And you can see a little bit of the white. It's sort of like a runway for hummingbirds and bees and butterflies, just saying, here's where you need to go to get your nectar. But this plant, I believe, there you go, it grows in full sun, it grows in part shade, and it reseeds. So if you want it, I'd love letting it reseed. I mulch with my pine needles, but where it normally has been reseeding, I just leave it. Now, if it's in a spot I really don't want it, I can dig it up and move it. But this is one that you will have forever. Homestead verbena. Homestead purple is one of the old-fashioned verbenas. Now, where lantanas they sort of go semi-dormant or dormant in the winter. Lantanas do very well through the heat of the summer. Verbenas hate the heat of the summer. But normally, these old-fashioned verbenas thrive in our winters and grow. My homestead in the landscape has been blooming for months. Now, last year's freeze, I don't remember, but it sure didn't kill it. I mean, it is just, but this is one wonderful plant. Verbenas, if you're not familiar with them, in this case, they're sort of almost a ground cover perennial. It's just one plant will slowly sort of grow out and cover, as you saw. And here's these wonderful clusters of them, again, made up of those tiny individual flowers that all the nectar-loving critters are looking for. There, that's the one in the landscape. Oh, there's Lucky. All the way in the far right corner, my little dog. But that is what's been blooming, that bed right there, for months, since January. They love, you plant them out in fall and winter, mostly winter, fall and spring, they're extraordinary. That's why if you can plant them where they have full sun in the winter, winter, and a little shade in the summer, so deciduous trees. If you give them a little shade in the summer, but that's full hot sun, and it still will survive the summers. Here's Lucky. You can tell how, the plant, that verbena might be 14 inches tall, just mounding. If you don't know about cat whiskers, orthosiphon, and I don't know why, it's sort of, I never have noticed, for some reason I say in quotes, mint-like. It's not in any way, shape, or form. But cat whiskers and porterweeds, when you want to attract your butterflies and your hummingbirds and your bees, and I know this is turning into a whole talk about those guys, but then that's what we all love. This is one of the ultimates. It will grow in full sun. It likes a little shade. They can easily get 3 feet tall. And these panicles, Rob can't kill anything. He's great. Anyway, these panicles of all those flower buds, you have the individual flowers. Let's see here. That's the white. But look at that. If that doesn't look like whiskers. But here is I forgot about that shot. But look at that. And we have shots of butterflies and hummingbirds on the same flower. That's one of the porter. But the porterweed, where you have your ray flowers, your lantanas and verbenas and pentas, with the cluster made up of little flowers, just imagine same kind of flower, but on a long, slender stem. And the flowers, all the buds are above the flowers, so they keep opening. And these plants, the blue can get up to easily 3 feet by 3 feet. Now these are average sizes. So you see the individual flowers, same thing, but they're on this long, slender stem. So you can see here, now this is amazing. This is in full hot sun in a big garden down in Galveston, actually at a ranch down in Galveston. And I was blown away. That's the purple porterweed, how well it did in the full sun. So it's full sun or part shade. But for those people who have shade or part shade and need some type of nectar plant, these are the ones to use. That's the purple. Now, Nectar One red porterweed. This is actually a picture of the coral porterweed. The purple and coral both can get 4 feet. You definitely want to, cut them back. Good girl, you get an A+. But Nectar One is a darker, richer coral. It is gorgeous. It's dark and rich and just spectacular. We no longer even grow this one because Nectar One's so beautiful. Pentas, I was mentioning pentas. We specialize in the old-fashioned heirloom pentas. Again, the fancy new varieties are developed for short or compact or different colors or double, and you don't always have that amount of nectar that the insects and birds need. But our white penta, we have all the info should be on the catalog that has everything on that catalog. At Penta would be alphabetical botanically. But what's special about this one, most of the old-fashioned pentas are a little taller, 2 to 3 feet. Can get 3 feet. The white that we grow is a beautiful, dense, more compact plant. And I wish all of them grew, actually, the growth habit of the white. But these beautiful clusters of flower. Then we have the Starburst Penta that has a two-tone pink flower. I don't have I wish I had a better picture, but look at all the buds coming up on that one. This is, hot pink it's a more solid pink, and it's a much prettier color than what you see up there. Actually, I'm about to plant a whole bunch of hot pink in my garden with the white in front. Okay, Stokesia, known as Stokes aster. I keep forgetting to put this up. It's not an aster. It's just the flower looks like a monster aster flower. This is another native, 4-part shade, and it's an evergreen. So it's the rosette, the basal rosette of the plant that's green in the wintertime, low mounding. And then comes spring, it starts putting up these stalks. And this is up in our front garden at the nursery under the live oak. This stand, I don't know what other pictures I have here. And that plant, that one plant there is about 3 years old. So it's been clumping out. And they bloom for a long time in the spring. And after a bloom cycle, you can go deadhead, well, not just deadhead, but cut the flower stalks off. And sometimes it might rebloom. It's competing with the crepe myrtle roots, so you just want to make sure it gets watered. And everything needs good, decent drainage. Nothing likes sitting in wet. But the Stokesias, now the Mel's Blue, this is not Mel's Blue. Mel's Blue is, I think, a little more lavender. I'm not too sure. I've not grown that one, but it's the only one we had at the time. And all the Stokesias are just spectacular. This one, now where these others are, the Divinity is a pure white, basically, and it's patented, so we're not allowed to propagate it. We have to buy liners. It is worth it. Anyway, you can see the wonderful clumping growth habit. In bloom, maybe 16, 18 inches tall, and long bloomer, and putting a grouping of white and then the blues in the same bed. You can even do it to where it sort of undulates through the garden with porterweed and pentas and cat whiskers behind it. Wine cup. This is our native wine cup. They have to have shade in the summer. Wine cup grow through the winter, and it hugs the ground, almost like a little ground cover. And as it ages over the years, it develops sort of like a miniature sweet potato type tuber that pushes out all this new growth. But through the winter, it needs sun. So if it's under deciduous trees, whether it's maybe crepe myrtles or pine trees, or mine are under pecan trees, actually. But it needs the sun in the winter and the shade in the summer. And so it grows through the winter, and then it blooms in the spring. And it's this gorgeous mat of foliage, sort of very cut leaf green foliage, and these beautiful, I think the handout said fuchsia, but to me, wine-colored flowers, poppy-like. What happens with this, it's found in nature, under pine trees, but also out in fields where you'll see it blooming, but in the summer it goes totally dormant. It just disappears. So if you have it in an area where it's too hot or too dry, it'll go dormant. Now, if it's too hot and too dry for too long, that could kill it. But normally it's not dead, it's just sleeping through the summer. Then it starts poking up in the fall. Okay, phlox. The phlox, there are many varieties. If you go online or look in catalogs, all kinds of phlox, beautiful. The basil rosette normally is evergreen, but these prefer part shade in the summer. And most phlox don't survive our summer heat and humidity. And a lot of phlox get mildew, really bad case of mildew. So we pretty much only had 2 basically native phlox that we were carrying, which I don't have available at the moment. These are 2 varieties that I'm going to talk about that we got 3 years ago to trial, and I'm really amazed. And they're patented. But the fashionably early flamingo, so the plant really starts pushing and growing right now. And mine have not gotten very tall. 2 feet maybe, even less. But these are big panicles of magnificent individual flowers. And what's really special about them, first, I've not seen any mildew, which was number 1. Second, they bloomed and bloomed. Normally they're a long bloomer in the spring. These guys, this and the white even more so, bloomed all the way into fall, which unheard of. Now that's what they did for me, but this is the sort of a pink and then the white, and you can see the stems coming up. And again, you could, if I haven't done it, normally after a heavy bloom, I'll go in and cut it back and see if it would bloom again. I never did that because it never quit blooming. I kept going out every so often through the summer, and it's like the crazy thing still has blooms. So I'm super excited about these 2 varieties. Now, this is, there are 2 ladies here I know this plant, and it's very rare in the trade. It's a type of iris that does not like wet feet, number 1. For those who know Louisiana iris, they love wet feet. It needs shade, and it has these beautiful, glossy, sort of arching, sword-like leaves. Sorry about that. And it colonizes. So it very slowly colonizes and fills in. And what's spectacular also about it, and it's evergreen, most people expect iris, 1 stalk and a couple of big blooms. This has very slender stems, intricately branched, and putting on, you see buds, 25, 40, 50 flowers that keep opening up along these slender stems. It's just extraordinary. This is under my live oak trunk is maybe 30 feet away. And, but here it is in the landscape, just starting to bloom. Oops. But you can, and sort of the individual plants are sort of fan-shaped like, and they just have these runners that run and fill in and pop up and make new babies. And once the new babies root, you can cut the umbilical cord between the parent and the baby and dig it up and move it. The number one thing is good drainage. If it's too wet, it can kill it. We had a problem at the nursery where the pots were staying too wet and couldn't seem to explain to the guys. But once you get a bed of this going, it's very unusual, very unique, and very rare. Australian violet. If you have shade and you want an evergreen ground cover, plant Australian violet. It thrives in shade and it's evergreen. And it just hugs the ground, it carpets, and always blooming these adorable little flowers. Now here, hanging over a wall. Now this is right out here, but that was quite a few years ago when we planted out a river of Australian violet. And there's the river after it filled in. Just with ball cypress knees coming up, but it's an evergreen ground cover for shade. Beautiful. I have it under the live oak where I've just allowed it to grow, and you can sort of walk on it occasionally. I wouldn't use it as a regular path, but blue shade Ruellia. This is a tough Ruellia. It's a ground cover Ruellia, not like the Katy or some of the ones that'll seed all over the place, but sort of a velvety leaf. It prefers part shade. Normally it's an evergreen. Last year there was one area where it didn't really get hit by the freeze, but other areas it froze back and came back. Now, where it grows in the sun, it can grow in full sun, but it doesn't look as happy. But beautiful, normally evergreen, thick, luscious, sort of soft-looking ground cover for shade gardens or part shade. And then, of course, the beautiful blooms. Turk's cap, our native Turk's cap, one of sort of a woody, stemmed, shrubby plant, native, found on the edge of woods and in woods, and this is in full sun, so it does just as well in full hot sun or part shade. But you do want to, if you want to contain the size of it, Turk's cap can get pretty big. You can cut it back anytime. Right now, February is when, because it drops all its leaves, that's when I would go in and give it a major whack so it'll come back very thick and full. But those flowers, there's a really nice ground cover look or effect. And as it gets taller, you can always go in and shear it if you want to keep it lower. But these are repeat bloomers, mainly spring, fall, and some summer. But a great native for more of a shrubby look in the garden. And then Greg Grant had developed the pink one, which is a pretty color and softer for people who may not want red in their garden. Very pretty flower. Okay, beauty berries. For those of you, I don't know if anyone doesn't know what a native beauty berry is, but if you don't, it's a native shrub that can get very lanky but very big. Beauty berries. Our natives are again found at the edge of woods and in understory plants. They can grow in full sun, no problem. And the beauty berries, in general, their little flowers on the native are not really significant, but it's the purple berries on the stems. And in the fall, when it drops all its foliage, all you have are these arching stems just covered in these beautiful berries. And then when the birds are really hungry, they will devour it. This is gorgeous. Actually, for those who know beautyberry, if you were to see just the plant and the foliage, you'd never know it was beautyberry. Foliage is nothing like our native. It's a beautiful, slightly glossy leaf The plant is very well mannered, beautiful shrub form. We grow them in full sun. You can see the leaf. Beauty berries are not known for their flowers. This starts blooming in the summer. They're known for their berries. These beautiful clusters of sort of pink lavender flowers for, it seems like months before it starts producing its berries. Then it produces these magnificent, dark, rich, sort of lavender purple berries, and in clusters. And so you have a plant that's not only, beautifully well-mannered, gorgeous foliage. It makes a pretty shrub. Now it's deciduous, so eventually it'll drop all its leaves. And for a while, first off, you got the flowers. That just amazed us in the summer. And then the berries, I don't know what, okay. But then the berries will last, there you go. So when it's defoliated and all you have are berries, so you have this extra color in the fall and early winter. People keep wanting to know about color. That's another whole program. Foliage color and berry color. And then eventually the birds will come through and, eat them. And then you just have these stems, bare stems. And that's when, again, in February, if you want to, prune it mainly so it just comes out even thicker and lusher come spring. Blueberries, if you don't know anything about blueberries, you got the northern high bush, which will never bloom and fruit down here. And most blueberries are grown up north or even up to Canada. But the rabbit-eye varieties of blueberries are the ones that produce down here. And those are the ones we used to carry until the commercial growers who grew them, some of them wanted blueberries that would produce earlier than the rabbit-eye so they could get their blueberries to market before their competitors. So they crossed, I believe it was someone up in northern Florida, native blueberry with, I don't know if it was the northern high bush or the rabbit-eye, but they developed these called southern high bush blueberries. And they're high chill, southern high bush, and low chill. Don't worry about that. It's just you want to make sure whatever you get is going to bloom down here. Chill means the northern ones have to have long periods of cold weather in order to even bloom. Like producing cherry trees. They'll never bloom here or produce because we don't have long periods of cold weather. But these blueberries, these southern high bush, start flowering and producing 3 to 4 weeks before the rabbit-eye. Now, of course, all the commercial growers are growing them. And I have found, quality-wise, I prefer these over the rabbit-eye type. Blueberries are shrubs. They can be big shrubs. You could incorporate them into a landscape. They're not really evergreen. They're semi-evergreen, depending on the winter. Some of them put on extraordinary fall color, oranges and reds, and they grow in full sun for good production. Okay, almost the end. But what is very important, these, even a 3-gallon pot can give you quite a few blueberries. Blueberries need acid. They need like a pH of 5 to really produce well. And they have a shallow root system. So you can grow blueberries very well in containers. Now what we have for sale are 1 gallons. And they're very established. They're not going to look like much right now because they haven't started branching out. But a lot of them are already blooming or setting fruit. But you need, if you're going to plant in a garden, you want to prep your soil and have good drainage. And you want to have it acidified. Now we like to get pine bark and mix in, but you need a semi-composted pine bark to mix into your soil. But if you have specific questions on that, you can ask me about it on how you prep. But we have ours planted out or you can grow them in containers. And but keeping them acidified is and even moisture. But they're otherwise so easy to grow and so much fun to go out and pick your own blueberries. Oh, one of the most important things, you have to have a minimum of 2 different varieties for cross-pollination for good production. So if someone got 2 of the same variety, it's not crossing. So now the more you have, more different varieties, better pollination, but you also, some of them start producing a little earlier than another one, so it'll also extend your blueberry production. Okay, let me go ahead, finish up. Vines, this is the variegated potato vine. The variegated one is evergreen, which is hard to believe, but it's yellow variegation on the foliage and clusters of white flowers. This is at Arborgate up in Tomball, and if you've never been to Arborgate, it's worth going to. There are many wonderful special nurseries on the back of the handout, the catalog, that are all local nurseries that have so many different things to go see and visit. But this is just spectacular. She sold everything we could grow when she had that growing on there. You can't really see the yellow variegation in that picture that well. Oops. And then it has the clusters of white flowers, but it's the evergreen and up until last winter, mine on the fence in the middle of winter glowed with that yellow variegation on it. Oh, Mexican butterfly vine, tough vine. It's evergreen, except that one winter, and it just dropped its leaves. But it likes full sun. It loves the heat. And once it gets established, it blooms it's covered with these clusters of yellow flowers. Then it produces these chartreuse butterfly seed pods that then turn brown. And many people use the brown seed pods, they're the green ones, for painting, for their kids to make ornaments. Let's see here. So this is actually a wire structure, arbor. There's an entrance on the other side with a little patio and table. And this is grown to cover it. And it's been like this for 20 plus years. Now it's already had a heavy bloom cycle. Those are all the seed pods. But they're the blooms. And when it's in full bloom, that is just solid yellow. It's a repeat bloomer. And it's just, I love this plant. And it's not always easy to come by. It takes a little while to get rooted in and established, but once it does, it grows pretty fast. Now, to end the talk, is the Peggy Martin rose. And by now, if you don't know who this is, the rose anyway. During Katrina, Peggy Martin, a Rosarian down Plaquemine Parish in Louisiana, had a property, like 400 and some odd varieties of roses, and just a amazing woman. Dr. Bill Welch, she had this rose growing on like a barn, but she didn't know what it was. And Dr. Bill Welch from A&M had gotten cuttings from her and had grown it and gave me cuttings and some other people cuttings, said, you got to grow this rose. It's incredible. And it's a climbing rose, but you have to train it up because all it wants to do is drape over. So once you train it up, and then it cascades, and when this comes into bloom, it's mainly a spring bloomer, sporadic in the summer and sporadic in the fall. But when it comes into bloom, it's spectacular for weeks on end. So Dr. Bill Welch decided to name it after her and wrote it up in Southern Living magazine and everything else. But clusters of pink flower and basically thornless. I mean, it's just, oh, that's one of my other dogs. That's Max. And there's Trooper and Dee. So thank you for your patience. I did run over a little on the time.